And in addition to being an evangelist of the field, he's also a very hands-on developer. He has also co-authored with David Castillo a popular book among the Flash developer community, and this book is Flash MX for Interactive Simulation. The topic of his talk today is online medical simulation for documenting operational competency. This is a timely topic as we increasingly realize the need for delivering training at the point of need and the potential impact of this strategy on the reduction of medical errors. Dr. K, you now have the floor. Please click on the...
Okay, thank you very much, Ramesh, and thank you very much for everyone for coming to hear. You should be able to see that I put my video little thing up there, and so just saying hello live from Philadelphia. Can someone just let me know that actually my voice is coming through? I'm going to actually turn myself off the air here because it's only really my mother, if she were in the audience, would be wanting to see this live video feed, and she probably would tell me that I should change my shirt. So I'm going to just click off the video there. And certainly if anyone wants to see the video. Okay, video two. Okay, terrific. Thank you very much again, everyone. My name's Jonathan Kay, and I'm going to be talking today about really how simulated equipment can impact training in a number of ways. I'm not really going to talk specifically about the biopreparedness project, but certainly a lot of it is going to be relevant, and I think that's certainly want to spark a discussion here as much as possible to hear your views and different projects that are ongoing and insights as well to make a real collaborative effort. Just a little bit about me. I did my PhD in computer science at the University of Pennsylvania. I focused on high-end physiological and pathophysiological simulations, particularly in lung and cardiovascular dynamics. So I came from a more high-end, more traditional simulation background. Over the past several years, however, I've been really focused on building simulation-based training to teach operational proficiency for equipment. The virtual surgery stuff is exciting and very alluring, but what I've found is the equipment aspect is probably 1,000 times more relevant and more problematic. And so I decided to focus on really how do we improve operational proficiency using computer simulation. I've built simulations, as Ramesh was saying, for equipment, a lot of times based in Flash. Also built simulations for emergency responders to practice collaborative skills, as well simulation engines to enhance tabletop exercises, for example, bioterrorism preparedness for public health officials with the RAND Corporation. And I don't really have a lot of slides here, but I want to show more examples and then answer questions and see where things go. One of the things I have to mention at the beginning is I'm originally from New York City, which means that if you don't interrupt, I'm going to keep talking. So please, I'm not very good with silence, and so please feel free to interrupt and ask questions or whatever clarifications. So the talk today, I really have two goals for the talk and pretty much for this type of training. The first is really by creating simulations, allowing a familiarization and allowing operators to gain comfort using equipment correctly. The second goal, really, if they use it correctly or use it better than they would without the training, you would expect to reduce the errors that the practitioners make in using that equipment. A lot of times, though, in medicine, there's such a push on the equipment side to reduce errors. For example, by reducing errors by creating more intelligent medical equipment, trying to make the operator less responsible or make it easier to operate the device. And so one question people ask, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with really how do we reduce errors, talk about that, and it's going to feed into why the first goal about the familiarization and comfort is so critical. So the one hypothesis is if we made our equipment smarter, wouldn't that really reduce healthcare errors? And what I like to point to is a few years ago, the Joint Commission issued one of their Sentinel alerts, and it was about the study was 23 reports of death or injury related to long-term ventilation, so people on ventilators either died or had serious consequences. And they looked at 23 cases, and they studied, well, what were the issues, the primary, secondary, and everything like that surrounding it. And so I like to kind of think about when people talk about creating machines that are smarter or better and less hopefully making the operator perform better in terms of just the equipment functionality. I want people to think about how many from this report do you think was actually due to equipment malfunction? These, I see the polling, thanks, Ramesh is telling me the polling options are at the end. Sorry, the options at the top of the illuminated application window. So we have one vote for 5%, and one vote for 16%. And then the other people are not, let's see, one's at 38%. Really, so what we're seeing here is that somewhere people are actually thinking that the equipment malfunctions are somewhere between about 5 and I guess 40%. Well, now the polling's closed here or whatever. The answer is, and this is a tricky New Yorker, that actually none were due to equipment malfunctions. None of the equipment that they used in their study actually malfunctioned. There were things like the volume might be too low or there might not be an alarm. But in terms of improving the actual performance of the device, there were none that were attributed. Whereas, and I see we got a couple people thinking 5%, so we're very close. But the really startling result for people who haven't seen this before is that 87% was attributed to inadequate orientation or training. And that 87% is about 4 times the figure for any equipment-related issue. So what did JCAHO actually say to do about this? They basically said that the department should review orientation and training programs for job-specific ventilator safety-related content and include in competency assessment process. So it really sounded nice. They've got a lot of words there. It seems like the right amount of length for a sentence. But what does it really say? How do you actually implement this? It really doesn't give any clues about how a department would carry out this type of competency assessment or increase their training programs. And so I think fundamentally, while we talk, if one of the goals is to reduce the errors and we want to focus on equipment, we really have to think that the smartness. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see the question. Neil has a question. Do you want me to? You want to use your microphone, or do you want to type it in the response box, in the text box? I'll turn off mine.
Okay. Hey, thanks. Yeah, I was just wondering if this goes over for, or transmitted, so to speak, to other systems also, rather than say the ventilator systems or infusion systems, anything like that. I've seen some stuff on CPOE, and I wondered how much it goes. How much this is relevant for those sorts of IT systems also. Thanks.
Okay, I'm not familiar with. I want to make sure I answer it exactly right. The CPOE, what does that stand for?
It's computerized position order entry systems.
Okay. Now, I'm not familiar with studies that are related to that, but what we'll be talking about in terms of simulation is definitely relevant to the physician order entry systems. It's because it's relevant to software programs that are outside of medicine completely, or instrumentation dealing with manufacturing. Fundamentally, what I'll get to is the idea that we're looking at ways of providing safe and documented practice opportunities. And so I think it's relevant. We can talk specific. There are specific questions just a little later about that. Does that answer your question? Okay. So the idea is that we really, the focus on making things better really needs to start with the operator. And we can certainly make equipment better, but we're going to see the most dramatic impact if we really focus on increasing the operational proficiency. So the core issue is just what in sort of talking about with Neil's issue, how do we help operators, whether medical, whatever, perform better so that they can use the equipment more proficiently? And then just tied part and parcel of that is how do we assess and document competency? And it's not really rocket science because it's not answering the fundamental questions of exactly how, but we need to provide effective, safe practice opportunities. We need to provide realistic assessment and consistent evaluation and documentation. When I say realistic assessment, a lot of times in the medical area, particularly with CME, the assessment tends to be a multiple choice question tacked on to whatever number of hours someone has been sitting in a chair. And when we talk about operational proficiency, we have when I say realistic, we need to really we need to make it such that that the skills are assessed in the way that they would actually perform it in the real world, and to actually close what they call the transfer gap between what people learn in training and what they're doing on the job. And all of these things, being able to give safe practice opportunities, realistic assessment, and a consistent evaluation and documentation of skills can be achieved by using computer-based simulation. What I'm going to show right now is actually a small example that a company, we'll see on the, what I should mention as well is all these examples are going to be, all these examples are available on the website, and I'll give you the URL at the end of the talk. Let me just see, it's not coming up in the window. Let me just move it over. Maybe it's having, there it is. Okay. Essentially, this company has a CPAP device, a pre-hospital device for giving for paramedics to give CPAP in the ambulance. And they wanted a way to be able to do an in-service, to send out an in-service without sending out the equipment, allowing someone to really try out the device, understand what it's for, before they actually, before the company went out and did the full in-service or actually sent the real machines out there. It wanted a simple way where people could get a hands-on feel for what the device was capable of and its particular intent. And then later tying that into some an in-service where they actually document how people perform on case studies. So what I'm going to show you here is now, this is a CPAP device. It's very simple, only has a single knob. Over here on the left-hand side is the airway pressure. It's giving a little graph over in the bottom right of the airway pressure and flow. What happens is someone goes through a little, the student goes through a little case study. Your patient is a 65-year-old male, history. Your protocol is to administer 10 centimeters of continuous centimeters of water, continuous positive airway pressure, CPAP. And so what they do is they get a chance to actually go and turn the knob or manipulate the device. Meanwhile, a part over that's happening on the other side is teaching them, telling them what's happening when they're increasing that CPAP level. So it's showing how the increased air pressure is forcing the water out of the alveoli. It's also showing them the impact if they go too far, if they go beyond what their protocol says, that they're having an impact on the systemic, on the pulmonary circulation, where they'd be compressing right here a capillary and having the impact on the cardiovascular system. So it's a way that they can see what they would see on the actual device as well as what the physiological impact would be without actually having the device right there, obviously, in front of them. Any questions about that? If I don't see any hands, I'll just keep going. Again, we'll also, these will be online, so you can actually try them out later. So let's talk just about what are some of the advantages as compared to sort of the maybe more traditional training methods of instructor in front of the room. And the advantages are that these training is all performance-based rather than what might be considered knowledge-based. It's not that concepts aren't important. It's just that at the end of the day, it's about can they perform the skill and can you document they can perform the skill. So by using simulation-based methods, we're dealing with a performance-based training and potentially certification. Some people might be I know the medical device manufacturers are sometimes scared of certification because they think that's going to add a lot of liability to what they're actually doing. But others, I think, realize that when you certify someone, it's actually more of a cover your rear. That if you can show that someone has performed to a certain competency or proficiency level, then if there is some types of trouble in the future where that person didn't perform, at least the hospital or the risk management can say, well, we did have, let's see. I see. Ramesh, do you want to have someone introduce themselves? Sorry. Let me know if you want me to give up the microphone. Oh, okay. No, okay. Sorry about that. And a lot of time about before the smaller transfer gap. We really want to minimize how we want people to train the way that they behave in the real world, the way they really apply themselves to real equipment, to real situations. And by using simulation-based methods, there's a smaller transfer gap. The ability to track and document performance data. I know in the medical community, the idea that if you didn't document it, it didn't happen, and that also goes just as far in terms of training. If a lot of times our training doesn't have that concrete documentation and tracking in terms of the real skills and information, and that's a real problem. We want to be able to document that and track what people are doing so we can see how they improve and make corrections as necessary. Simulations can be either self-paced, kind of like what you saw before, or instructor-led, where I'm in front of a class and each person has access to the infusion pump or the ventilator or whatever. The core message, I think, in terms of what makes good simulations, though, is what makes good training. That the success is based on the design of the instruction that enables the people to perform. It's not on the technology. And that took me a while. It took me much longer to realize that than probably I should have. That when people build simulations, the focus tends to be on the simulator. And that actually can be distracting because when we're talking about simulation-based training, I think the priority has to be on the training and the training impact. And simulation can add a lot in terms of interactivity and realism, but if you focus on building the simulator over actually what the training objectives are and the measurable performance improvement, then you're going to distract yourself and ultimately come out with something that's not as effective as if you focus primarily on what you want someone to do on the training content. So training there in terms of instrumentation is one thing. This is now what I'm going to do is show you another. This is now another example of a. Let's also get rid of that. This is just. Let's see if I didn't close that. It's blinking all over the place. This is now a physical procedure where someone is supposed to take the vacutainer and place a blood drop. They've already put this little needle at the top. Place a blood drop into this lab analysis equipment. They basically pick up the vacutainer, and as you see, sort of on the top left, you get a little crosshair there. When you know that you're over the spot, it's not going to teach the hand-eye coordination, but it is going to visually let people know where they're supposed to put make the drop. And then as they once they make the drop, they pull it out, and that rotation is just happening automatically. Few people have trouble knowing which end of the thing to put in, and that's why it's not something that we really made people consciously have to do. That tediousness a lot of times while people think you want to have some realism by making them do everything, making things tedious is not that effective. But we do want to have a little bit of fun. So if they actually drop the vacutainer before they get back into the test tube, into the rack, then it actually will. And what will happen is people will then just, the first time, they'll just pick it up and just drop it a lot. But eventually they get the basic idea. And when they actually approach the real device, they're much more comfortable with what they actually have to do. So to make that real hands-on training much more effective. Now, that's a sort of type of physical procedure. You're not going to teach someone how it feels to hold a vacutainer or how to put something together that's just from a tactile sense, but you're going to give them that familiarity so that that newness, the newness of holding and touching things at least is something that they're not going to get confused by as well operationally what they have to do. Here's another example. This is a ventilator example where you can assemble the ventilator and actually do full instrument training. I'm opening it right now, so you'll be able to. And I'll put it over here. So again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them, and I'll give out the microphone. So in this is both used as a self-paced and when one of the clinical educators is on site to teach how to operate the equipment. So it has a bunch of marketing types of features in here. But what happens is here in terms of the ventilator tour, a person now can go through not only just sort of see what the areas are, but walk through and actually practice operating, starting out with simple tasks like opening and closing this security door, go into more complex types of manipulation, turning the machine on and off, and then where they're actually practicing on what is for all intents and purposes the real device. You can see here some of it is grayed out, and so when you start with the simple tasks, we don't distract them by letting them change different options. But as they get to more complex tasks, then we open up areas and let them do what they would like to do and potentially make mistakes. The most important thing, what makes this, what makes the difference between a relatively straightforward project and an insanely complex project is being clear about what objectives, what types of interaction you want the person to be able to do. So while on the surface you might think that this ventilator acts exactly like the real ventilator, but behind the scenes it acts exactly like the real ventilator for a certain constrained part of what needs to be taught. So if I go here, I can go and change the volume control level. I can go and change it to pressure control but the difference between, and it reverted now back to 600 milliliters because I didn't confirm that. Here it's asking me increase the frequency to 12. Actually, I went to 15. But the idea here is that we walk through all the different parts as this kind of tour, where we're actually operating the machine and getting the feedback as to what these consequences would have been if we do the correct or incorrect. Then in terms of the assessment, because they made have a separate area where we actually go and set up a patient. We learn how to. They use their checklist essentially in assist control here, where now the person has to go and set up the machine in whatever according to the specifications that essentially the doctor's orders here. And so you can see along on the left-hand side, we're getting little check marks here. And this is still a very controlled atmosphere, but it lets them practice as they would have to practice their protocols, connect to the patient, all these types of things. Once they've achieved this type of level and the instructor wants to actually give them a quiz, or they want to do this on their own to do a little mini operational proficiency. What they call it is the demonstrate basic competency. Then they go into one of a number of different scenarios where they don't get the check marks, but they're given the order, and they have to now set the tidal volume to 600 milliliters, which will actually be in volume control mode. So they have to know to actually put that there. They've got to go and set the machine properly to that, and other types of things. Inspiratory time at 0.8 seconds. I'll put that there. And now when they actually try and see, okay, let's say that they think they set it up properly, when they want to go get graded by the automatic scoring mechanism, it would tell them which ones they passed or not. And if they pass it, they can print a certificate, or it can actually be sent to a database so that the hospital manager, the department manager, can track whether people have done what they needed to do. I mentioned also in terms of assembly, kind of like with the physical procedure. This now is knowing where the parts go. You can get hints. You sort of kind of piece it all together, and the point isn't that they deprive them of all information and just see if they kind of sink or swim. So successful, I think, these types of training have a layered approach to remediation, where if someone is taking a long time or clearly not getting the right point, then you bring in the remediation. But you don't beat them over the head and say, press this, press this, press that. In the instructional design world, the type of training where it's press this button and press this is known as monkey see, monkey do. And while you see a lot of that training out there, probably a lot of people like me has gone through some of these classes where you do that. At the end, you've built a web server or something, but you really don't know what you've actually accomplished. So rather than just spoon feed the trainees, let's see. I'm getting asked a question. What's the feedback from users involved with the simulation? Overwhelmingly, it's positive and wonderful, because what we've talked in terms of the users, that they want more case studies. They want hands-on practice. That's what they're missing in their regular job, where they can do it in a safe way and experiment. So being able to cut out all the reading. I mean, reading is fine. I certainly have to understand concepts, but switching to a more hands-on practice just motivates the people who in much more than if they have to sit down with the user manual, or they just look at a couple pictures, because they really feel like that they are part of the case. So in this situation here, we're just going to complete this, and I'll just show you as you put this together. Again, it's not going to teach you the tactile sensations of holding tubes or doing things, but it is going to. You can practice repeatedly, and it's a safe way to make mistakes and to learn. And again, you're more doing it rather than just reading about it or watching it. And that active involvement translates into, and ultimately, how you practice with the real device, or practice or actually apply the real device in the real world. So what I'm going to go back now is to show you another example. This one, the company wanted to do that checklist style thing, which was fine, but I think as the question about what users want, I think people want more hands-on training, and they want more case studies. Give me an approach in terms of a case study. And so let me actually I'm going to skip over to, since we're talking about ventilators. I think one of the most important aspects in creating good training is to make it feel like the real thing, make it relevant. And so even operational things, when you're learning to operate a device, can be cast into a scenario, sort of a case study type of format. And it just makes for, I think, an overall better experience, a more compelling experience. And then certainly if they're actually operating in a simulated real case, you have a better sense of how they would perform in that case. So what I'm going to do is now go over, I'm going to share this one. There it is. Okay. So this is another ventilator, much more complicated ventilator, the Avita 4. But this one now, what I wanted to show you is this is a case study that teaches the exact same things in terms of the orientation, or it can be used for the same things, but it's more a more type of a hands-on approach, a clinical case study approach. Probably maybe too small for you to read. I don't know if I resize this, whether it will make a difference. But it's basically saying here, as you can see, I set up the machine as follows with certain things, and so someone could actually go and verify that. They follow along, and then they're asked by the doctor to increase the PEEP to 8 centimeters, increase the tidal volume to 700 milliliters. So they have to go and, based on their introduction, they have to know how they actually operate increase the inspiratory, increase the tidal volume, increase the PEEP. And they can, which has a lot of flexibility in the order. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear someone that mentioned it was looking fine. As they increase the tidal volume to 700 milliliters, let me see if what I can do is zoom in a little bit here so you can see what that looks like. So you can see that they're getting what people familiar with the Avita 4, this really is a virtual identical reproduction of the device. And so they're operating, and when they set it to 700, now it actually will go on to the next stage. Let me show you back. It says, thank you. Did you see the tip went from 37 centimeters of water to 42 centimeters of water? We can look over here, the inspiratory peak. So it's a way of discussing, a way of presenting things that are going on, but the person is much more involved in the care within whatever the constraints that the person who had designed it wants to keep them. But it's a much more interesting problem than if you say, okay, well, press this button to set the tidal volume, press this one to do PEEP, press this one to do that, and now just in practicing in a more sterile way, it makes it more relevant. And then and I don't know if there have been formal studies to see how this more relevance makes for more effective impact, but it certainly is common sense that many industries will buy on face value. I mean, the military has certainly shown that in flight simulation and other types of things, how critical relevance to the actual context is. What I was going to show with the previous one is just another example. This is now a bedside monitor. Let me open this one here. Okay. And in this one, I don't know how smooth the animation is, but this one now, actually, you might be able to hear in the background the patient monitor is alarming, and we have to go through and silence the alarms and actually go through. So we're actually going to sort of work through a little case where we're not really doing a lot of diagnosis. It's actually getting annoyed by the alarm there. But we're now actually working through. And this content here that they developed was still more of a touch this, touch that, which I desperately wanted to get away from, because again, that's sort of monkey see, monkey do. But the idea remains that by having people do rather than just watch what happens, they feel. Oh, I'm hearing all this noise. Now, what you can do with the simulation, by building simulations, here you see the bedside monitor inside this little frame. But doing it in the right way, you can actually, I'm going to show you what the actual simulator looks like. The actual simulator is built out separately. And then essentially the lesson configures which options are relevant. This is a place where it can be almost an abyss. if you go after and say, well, I'm going to build this perfectly reusable component as my simulator, and then I'll be able to configure it in whatever lesson I want. I mean, that sounds like a really good idea until you realize that you have a lot of choices in terms of building out complexity with your simulator. If you just say, I'm going to make it reusable, and if you're not specific about how it can be reused, then you're really just opening yourselves to doing a lot more work than necessary. It sounds good because it sounds like, okay, I'll just do everything. That seems like the most reasonable to do. But like for this example, this machine actually has a lot of things programmed in it. But because we knew exactly what tasks had to be done, I'm just sort of scrolling through a couple of these, maybe probably a little bit too fast. But because we knew which functions needed to be done and which needed to be consistent, this simulator actually was much less complicated than it could have been if we just started out thinking we have to duplicate a lot of functionality. So the critical aspect is knowing exactly what you want the person to be able to accomplish in the simulator, and then you defining the level, the amount of deviance or interactivity that you would allow them really to deviate from whatever the correct or some of the correct paths. Again, it's really something that I can't emphasize enough, that good planning in building simulators makes a huge difference, just like it makes a huge difference in anything. But the simulator community typically is drawn to technical fidelity, and that will just draw you into, it really can open a Pandora's box in terms of the amount of resources and time when, if you focus on the training objectives, focus on the interactivity that's necessary to support the training, you can produce something that can be just as reusable, but at the same time very focused and much more cost effective. I know I've gone a long time without anyone asking a question. Anyone have a question? So feel free to type in there, and I'll give up the microphone. Well, so places where I think I don't want to be pessimistic about it, but I think it's good to see where did simulation projects typically fail, and almost as a rule, it's when expectations are unrealistic, whether in terms of the resources that you have or time required, the capabilities of the team, the maturity, how many have they built. Typically, a lot of the problems surface not in the first simulation problem, but in really the second or third, when you've when you've passed the first one and you feel somewhat invincible. But most importantly, it really is this item here. I don't mean to beat it to death, but it's lack of knowing specifically what you want to accomplish and how you're going to measure it. If you don't, like some places say, well, we just believe in simulation, we're not going to measure it. You're losing an enormous amount of very useful information, both in terms of the operator proficiency, seeing how they can improve their performance, but also in terms of the training itself. If you don't know how people are performing, you can't make the training better. You can't understand how can I do better, how can I keep pushing the limit. Another thing here in terms of how you're going to test it. Sometimes I hear people say, well, I want to learn, I want the student to understand how to operate the controls of the ventilator. That kind of goal, obviously being really fuzzy and vague, is just not possible to test. You can't measure their ability to, just in a general sense, operate the equipment. So you really have to drill down to details, and as trainers, and really as the instructional designers, we have to take responsibility for what it means to be proficient. So we can't get away with just saying, I'm going to throw a lot of material at them and just kind of hope that they absorb some of it and give them a little test, but we really have to take responsibility for the tests that we produce to say, almost really to the level where you want to produce something where if someone walks up and says, I can operate this machine, your test, and they pass your test, so that should convince you that they can proficiently operate that machine, just based on the way they perform with that simulator. Another area where simulation, a lot of times people think because it's got a lot of flash and glitz that simulation is going to help all types of issues. But if your problem isn't something that is a training issue, if it's maybe the people aren't motivated or they're too busy, and then simulation or any kind of extra fancy stuff is not going to really be helpful. So it's really understanding what you're after, understanding how you can measure what you're after, documenting what you're after, and then figuring out how technology and the interactivity plays the role. Key ingredients in terms of instructional design, and is that one thing that actually it's not David Merrill. I'm sorry, I got the wrong one. Tom Gilbert. Tom Gilbert talked about worthy performance problems. A lot of people have trouble setting the time on their VCR or DVD players and things like that. And so a company who makes DVD players might say, hey, let's make a simulation that lets people set the time on their DVD to practice that. Well, while it might be useful, it might be sort of, hey, look, there's a nice little simulation. It's not a particularly worthwhile performance problem because lives are not lost typically because someone has not set the time properly. It's not, in terms of worthiness, something we might think either in terms of human life or in terms of a cost from a business perspective, but you really want to focus on real performance problems that you can point your finger at and say, if I solve that problem, there would be a measurable result, whether it's quantitative in terms of money or cost or whatever. So that's an important concept, that all problems, while you could simulate things to help in training, are not worthwhile, and so you really want to focus on the low-hanging fruit. Again, beating this to death, but specific measurable performance objectives. Realistic goals within the resource constraints. It might be nice to have a fully interactive, everything so-and-so simulation, and you might think, well, that would be a great one if we actually had that. You always have to, it's always a cost-benefit analysis of thinking about what resources do you have. And I think even in a cost-constrained environment, it's useful because you can find that point of minimum technology, maximum effectiveness. Too often, especially with government spending, it's throw all the technology at a problem before you really understand what the problem is. And then when something is solved, you say, look, here, $1 million simulator solved our problem. Well, that's nice, but what happens if you could have solved that same problem or gotten 90% by spending $50,000 instead of $1 million? Or and so there's always, a friend of mine says, there's 10 ways to spend every dollar, and so understanding what you can do and having a hypothesis about what you're going to solve is so critical. Then in terms of building simulators, it's the sound processes for design, implementation, and evaluation. Designing the system, building, and as a cycle, not just do it once through and you're all done. I want to thank you very much for your time and attention. You see the link up there, eqsim.com/demos is where I have each of those demos you can try out online and practice with the ventilator or with the CPAP device. We also have elevators. I have a couple other examples that I'm happy to sort of show as people are interested, but I wanted to give a certain amount of time for questions and things. So I'm going to get off the microphone, and people can either type or just plug in with their microphone. Thank you again very much, and there's my email address.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I'm just trying to wait for questions. Are there people who want to actually ask questions? If you don't have a microphone, please use the direct messaging window. I have a question while I'm waiting for the others. Could you just describe briefly the workflow, starting from that some? I'm just assuming that, for example, we might actually be working with the nursing department, and if we go to them and present them with the various simulations that's possible, what would be the ideal workflow that you would suggest in terms of how to start the process of trying to work on what needs to be simulated, and how long does such a process typically take? as you see, I tried my best to get, as many people from the healthcare and medical communities, and I still have the problem of trying to find millions of ways to bridge the gap, that there is always, something come up, and somehow the communication isn't flow easily. Well, I mean, generally, what's your feeling about these questions? I'm sorry, there's probably 2 or 3 questions in that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I think I see where you're going. In terms of the workflow, I think that where you start out is you focus on the skills that you want to teach. And one way that actually is, I find a useful way to do that is to write a competency test. Forget about the actual content that you're going to teach them, but write a test that if I came up to you and said, I can operate this piece of device, or I can perform in this capacity. Now you just give me a test and let me demonstrate my competency. And what will happen is that you'll come up, maybe it'll be an iterative process, but you'll come up with the different elements and basic skills that you feel are important that would let you say that I would be competent. And it'll also give you an opportunity to see if you find that if you find that you come up and start with maybe like 10 or 5 to 10 different tasks, and then you think, gee, well, I didn't really ask about this other kind of task. You'll see a way to increase whatever your test is, and focus on that core set of skills. Also, in addition to setting on the skills, what you're doing by creating the competency is setting up how you're going to evaluate those skills, and what kind of deviation you're going to allow someone to perform. There may be several good ways to actually perform some procedure, and you've got to decide whether how much deviation you want to allow them to do, because certainly in medicine as well, the idea of protocol-based medicine to reduce errors, that while you might have 20 different ways to get to the same objective, there's value in having people practice it basically the same way. So I would say that the number one area in terms of workflow is focus on the competency first. And when you have your test and you're happy with basically the types of skills, at that point, and this is all just like a face-to-face, a person-to-person type of thing. At that point, you might storyboard. You might think about it, even in something like PowerPoint. What can I now make? What types of my assessments, which you're trying to make as concrete as possible, how am I going to automate to give the ability to deviate, or however, essentially build out a storyboard. And then one thing that we often do with the storyboard is to actually test it out. I mean, frequent iterative testing is really a good way of recognizing the failure points and understanding where you have to expand. Before you invest a lot of time building out a lot of training or just dumping in a manual, or having them read a lot of passages and not understanding the impact, this is kind of what's called designing lean instruction, L-E-A-N. The idea that you figure out what you want the person to be able to do, and then you build in the instruction that's needed to achieve that. And from the storyboard perspective, what you're doing is you're saying, let's take a minimum technology, even still pictures, than we might do in a storyboard. And if I use that still picture, could I train someone to what level of proficiency if they just saw those still pictures or some type of basic PowerPoint interaction? And what you'll find is that they'll do well in certain things and not so well in others, and then that'll give you the area to focus in terms of the actual simulation or the more interactive. I mean, I say simulation, but it's really just more interactive pieces. But it really gives you that focus because you know which skills you're looking at, and you know what types of things are not so adequately handled by just sort of more static, more representations. And at that point, in terms of the simulation for workflow, as one of the things that we talk about in our book are software-defined design methodologies like state machines, hierarchical state machines, and state charts that have been out for more than 20 years. But a lot of people still, even the computer science often this type of stuff is taught in a theory class as opposed to application, and it's something that's within the grasp of college level students, freshman, sophomore, computer science. It's not complex. It's just connecting it to real world. But if you just give them free rein and say, go off and build a simulator, a lot of people, there's a lot of different ways they could do it, and it could take a short amount of time or a very long amount of time. So what's really important is to constrain as much as possible beforehand the types of interaction. How long would it take? I mean, just in terms of one of the other questions, things like that little CPAP device with that single knob, that really you put together, as you can imagine, just a couple of days. Something like the ventilator, each of the HT50, the one where I was showing the assembly and everything like that, the actual simulator took probably about 3 months, 2 to 3 months to build. I mean, it's a fairly complicated device, and I'm the first to admit that we actually went way overboard in terms of interactivity. If I had known then what I know now in terms of defining the skills, I think it could have been much more constrained and probably taken easily half the time. What happens is that you kind of get caught up with the thrill with the client saying we can use it for this and we're going to do it for all this, and in the future it's going to do this and it's going to do that, and so you build out all these functionality, and then at the end they're busy and everyone's busy, and so it never really gets expanded. So it just has ended up being more of a drain on whatever development resources. Complex things take a lot of time to build. The Avita 4 simulator, that took 3 or 4 months, almost twice the amount of time that the other one did. And again, a better planning in terms of what the specific skills and the measurement could have cut that time down by at least 50%. And especially also learning the software design methodologies has a huge impact on the amount of time and the resources and the level that's needed to build simulators. So I hope with other parts of that question or other people have questions.
Actually, we've got a doctor among us. He's Dr. Patel, and he's actually a medical doctor, and it would be really interesting to see what's his views on the kind of simulations that that has been presented. Arvin, have you got anything? Any comments? I'm not sure. Oh, okay. There's somebody else who's got a question.
Yes, I wanted to know if you have any figures on whether it is popular with only nurses, nursing staff, PAs, or with the medical docs. Do you have any figures on that kind of thing?
I don't have specific figures. I know that a lot of the doctors, I mean, particularly in the U.S., don't really operate equipment. It's more the nurses, the PAs, the respiratory techs. For example, I was talking or wanted to talk at a medical school about this equipment, and they really just didn't have the time. They basically said in their 4 years, and even the equipment, if they get exposure, is really in the residency. I know that I've given talks at a number of places where doctors take a more active role, and I don't have specific numbers, but the more active role really is engaging. Again, when it becomes that when training is the issue. A lot of times that if people are not motivated to learn, they don't think it's relevant, that it doesn't matter how wonderful the simulator is. I'm trying to think where are places that where you could find information about particular numbers, and I'll have to think about that. Sorry. I see that Barb C has a comment. I wish all my classes could use simulation. The best way to learn is to do. Simulations make that more possible. Thank you. Yeah, it does. And there's always everything is a cost-benefit analysis, and everyone would wish. We wish that we could use more simulations. It certainly would make people more motivated, and engaged when they really needed to learn. But if there's one message I think here, that simulation isn't just one thing. It's not just a flight simulator. There's a lot of different levels, and in terms of just from static pictures to fully interactive, fully immersive systems. And the lesson that I've learned in being in the simulator industry and seeing its impact on training really goes back to the idea that that good training is just about good instruction and understanding the role and where interactivity can make the most difference. And in a lot of ways, I mean, like people point to video games. Right now, one of the big movements is to what they call serious games. And it's really, it's the serious business for the game companies because they're looking for opportunities to break into this market. But they don't have in this market the multi-million-dollar budgets. And so what they try and do is say, well, the patient lives are irreplaceable, and so that should justify spending $500,000 or $1 million or a couple $1 million on building out our wonderful simulator that's going to really help all these people. And that sort of emotional argument is somewhat compelling, but at the same time, you want to focus that it's only a $1 million simulator is a good value only if you can't get pretty much the same results with a cheaper simulator. And a lot of times this idea, okay, so I see there's a comment from physician perspective, simulation is great. I don't know if anyone wants to take the microphone. I don't mean to keep talking, but it's just I see that happen all the time where the argument is more from emotional pull, and from a practical point of view, I really would like to see the industry consider different forms of interactivity and get a better understanding of exactly where and what types of simulations are most effective, rather than just trying to say whatever the cost is going to be, because at some point you reach that diminishing return. I don't know if anyone wants. I'm going to.
All right. I think. Okay. I just see that we don't have any more questions. I just want to share with you something I heard when I was talking about your work to somebody I met from one of the major hospitals, which is actually Portsmouth Hospital here. And that person mentioned that I just showed him the examples, and he said, well, if there is anyone doing such a thing, then that person should stop working. They'd be, showered with funding and money. And I was always thinking, I mean, that looks so. It appears that there is always a strong interest from the community, but when it really comes to get the thing done, I'm wondering what is missing, and whether you've thought about this. What is the stumbling block to exactly. There's always interest when someone else pays for it. But I also think that maybe there is a culture issue. It's just like for this web conference session. I tried my best to target the healthcare professionals, and I didn't get as much as I thought I would on board. So I think there is a really hard and difficult job ahead. To really try to break this, technology and this technology. I don't know what gap that is, but anyway, I mean, I think at least on my part, I'll just try to work harder and try to get more people on board. So, well, I think what I'll do is it's already 1:04 p.m. and yes, I guess it's probably the right time to close unless somebody else has any comment. And I'm reading your comments, Jonathan. Yes, I guess it's best to try to go for the low-hanging fruit, but sometimes even that is difficult. Okay. Right. So unless Neil wants to conclude with anything, I'll just release the floor and let him conclude this talk.
Okay, I just want to say
Neil, I think we lost you. Houston, we have a problem.
I would trust it, you know. We are on the air. Okay, I pressed the thing. I don't know what happened there, but at any rate, I just wanted to thank you again, Jonathan, for this very illuminating talk. And you know, I couldn't agree more that the capabilities here are incredible. The potential is certainly incredible. We have to figure out how to motivate people in the medical care world to actually think along these lines. And I think even more importantly, try to sort of fine-tune this so we can figure out what is appropriate for diagnosis, for treatment, for quarantine, for safety, for those sorts of things, for bioterrorist events, and certainly how this all integrates in with the command structures that are evolving for all types of emergency preparedness. So this is very extremely good, and thank you so much. Really appreciate this.
Thank you again. Thank you, Ramesh, for setting this up. I really appreciate it. And for anyone else, as I put in my notes, I'm happy to talk more about this with anyone, and just as we can move this forward. And as part of the biopreparedness project, the ways I'm always eager to discuss potential ways that it can have the most impact. Thank you again.